before we descend into 5,000 years of darkness, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear is not theology. This is not a sermon. This is not an attempt to convince you that hell exists or doesn't exist, that any religion is right or wrong. This is history. Documented, verified, sourced history of how humans across every culture and every century have imagined the place where souls go to suffer. We will trace hell from its oldest origins in ancient Mesopotamia, through Egyptian underworlds, Greek Hades, the development of the Christian Inferno, Islamic Jahannam, Buddhist and Hindu Naraka, Dante's 9 circles, medieval art and torture, Victorian spiritualist claims of visiting hell, and finally modern psychological interpretations. Every claim I make will be sourced, every translation verified, every artistic depiction traced to its origin. This is not speculation. This is what humans believed, what they wrote, what they painted, and how those beliefs shaped civilization. If you value deeply research content that examines religion and mythology through a historical lens rather than a faith lens, that presents pure documented scholarship without repetition or padding, then subscribe. Turn on notifications and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Because hell is universal. Every culture invented it. Every civilization needed it. And understanding why tells us more about humanity than perhaps any other concept we've created. Now settle in. What follows is comprehensive. We begin not with fire and brimstone, but with the oldest written words about the land of the dead. Words carved in clay 4,000 years ago in a language most people have never heard. Words that would shape every conception of hell that followed. Let us descend. Chapter 1. The Oldest Darkness, Mesopotamia. The concept of hell does not begin with Christianity. It does not begin with any religion most people practice today. It begins in Sumer, in Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, approximately 3,000 years before the Common Era. And it begins not with punishment for sin, but with something simpler and more terrifying, the realization that everyone, good, evil, king, slave, goes to the same dark place when they die. The Sumerians called this place Kur, sometimes Irkalla. It was not a place of judgment, it was simply the land of the dead. And according to the oldest texts we possess, it was a house of darkness where the dead ate dust and clay. Our earliest detailed description comes from a text modern scholars call The Descent of Inanna, written in cuneiform on clay tablets approximately 2100 BCE. But the story itself is certainly older, passed through oral tradition for generations before anyone wrote it down. Inanna was the Sumerian goddess of love, war, and fertility. And in this epic, she decides to descend into the underworld, ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. The poem describes the journey. To reach Kur, Inanna must pass through 7 gates. At each gate, the guardian demands she remove one item: her crown, her necklace, her breastplate, her garments, until she arrives naked and powerless before Ereshkigal's throne. This stripping is not arbitrary. It represents the absolute equality of death. In the underworld, status means nothing. Power means nothing. Even a goddess arrives as nothing. Ereshkigal kills Inanna. The goddess's corpse hangs on a hook for 3 days before other gods negotiate her release. But there is a price. Someone must take her place. Her husband Dumuzi is chosen. He will spend half the year in Kur, alternating with his sister. This myth explains the seasons. When Dumuzi is below, vegetation dies. When he returns, spring comes. But more importantly, it establishes a principle that will echo through every hell tradition that follows. The underworld demands balance. Life requires death. Escape requires substitution. What was Kur like for ordinary dead? Another text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, provides description. This epic, composed around 2100 BCE, but describing events set centuries earlier, includes a scene where the hero Gilgamesh speaks with the spirit of his dead companion Enkidu. Enkidu describes the underworld, the house where the dwellers are without light, where dust is their sustenance and clay their food. They are clothed like birds with feathers. They see no light and dwell in darkness. This is not torture. This is negation. The Mesopotamian underworld is absence. Absence of light, of proper food, of movement, of life. The dead exist in a state that is not quite existence. They are shades, shadows of what they were, dwelling in eternal gloom, eating dust. But the Mesopotamians did believe in different fates for different dead. The properly buried, with correct rituals performed, existed more comfortably than those who died violently or remained unburied. Women who died in childbirth, warriors who died in battle, those who drowned. Each had specific conditions in the afterlife, though none were pleasant. The worst fate was to be forgotten. If no one poured libations, left food offerings, or spoke your name, you faded even from the underworld's dim existence. By the time we reach the Babylonian period, around 1800 BCE, the concept had evolved slightly. The Descent of Ishtar, the Babylonian version of Inanna's story, adds more detail about the underworld structure. Ishtar must pass through 7 gates, each guarded. At each gate, she loses something, arriving powerless. The text describes the underworld as the land of no return, the house of darkness, where those who enter are deprived of light. But Babylonian texts introduce something new, the concept of divine judgment in the underworld. The gods Shamash and Sin were believed to judge the dead, though what exactly they judged and what punishments they assigned remains unclear in surviving texts. This is the seed, just the seed, of the idea that the afterlife involves judgment of earthly behavior. The Akkadian poem of the righteous sufferer, sometimes called the Babylonian Job, written around 1400 BCE, describes a man's nightmare vision of being dragged to the underworld prematurely. He sees the house whose entrance has no exit, where the dead are clothed in feather garments like birds. This suggests that even in life, Mesopotamians feared premature death and burial more than they feared punishment after death. What's crucial to understand is that the Mesopotamian underworld was not hell as later traditions conceived it. It was not primarily about punishment. It was about the inevitability and equality of death. Kings and slaves ended in the same dark house. Heroes and cowards ate the same dust. The horror was not torture, but meaninglessness, existence without joy, without purpose, without light, forever. This Mesopotamian vision would profoundly influence every culture that followed. When the Hebrews were exiled to Babylon in 586 BCE, they encountered these traditions. When the Persians conquered Mesopotamia, they absorbed these ideas. When the Greeks traded with Near Eastern cultures, these concepts filtered westward. The underworld as dark house, as place of shades, as realm requiring passage through gates. These motifs appear again and again in later traditions because they originated here, in Sumer, 4,000 years ago. The Mesopotamian contribution to hell is this: they established that death was a place, not just an event, that the dead continued in some form, that the afterlife was dark, joyless, and inescapable. They created the template. Every culture that followed would elaborate on this template, adding judgment, adding punishment, adding hope of escape or damnation. But the foundation, the house of darkness where all the dead go, was laid in ancient Sumer, carved in cuneiform on clay tablets that have survived millennia, to tell us how the oldest civilizations understood what awaits us all. Chapter 2. The Weighing of the Heart, Egypt. While Mesopotamia imagined the afterlife as universal darkness, Egypt created something far more complex. The Egyptian underworld, called Duat, was not simply a destination, but a journey. A dangerous, intricate, terrifying journey that every soul must undertake, filled with challenges, monsters, and most significantly, judgment. Our primary source for understanding Egyptian afterlife beliefs is the collection of texts modern scholars call the Book of the Dead. This is a misleading title. The Egyptian name was the Book of Coming Forth by Day, or Spells for Going Forth by Day. It was not a single book, but a collection of approximately 200 spells, prayers, and instructions meant to guide the deceased through the Duat and into the afterlife. These texts were written on papyrus scrolls and placed in tombs, evolving over nearly 2,000 years from around 1550 BCE to 50 BCE, though the traditions they preserve are certainly older. The journey begins at death. The deceased's bay, one component of the soul, often depicted as a bird with a human head, must travel through the Duat to reach the Hall of Two Truths, where judgment occurs. The Duat is not empty darkness like the Mesopotamian Kur. It is a realm filled with lakes of fire, rivers to cross, gates guarded by demons with knives, serpents that must be defeated or appeased, and challenges that require the correct magical knowledge to overcome. This is why the Book of the Dead contains so many spells. Each spell addresses a specific obstacle. Spell 125, the most famous, provides the negative confession, a list of sins the deceased must deny committing before the gods. Spell 6 prevents the deceased from being forced to do manual labor in the afterlife. Spell 30b prevents the deceased's heart from testifying against them during judgment. The Egyptians believed that with the right knowledge, the right spells spoken at the right moments, even an imperfect person could navigate the Duat successfully. The climax of the journey is the weighing of the heart. In the Hall of Two Truths, presided over by Osiris, god of the dead, the deceased's heart is placed on a scale. On the other side sits a feather, the feather of Ma'at, representing truth, justice, and cosmic order. 42 judges, one for each nome, administrative district of Egypt, observe. Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, records the result. If the heart and feather balance, if the deceased lived according to Ma'at, the soul is declared true of voice and granted access to the field of reeds, a paradise resembling idealized Egypt, where the blessed dead live eternally in prosperity, working fertile land, celebrating festivals, reuniting with loved ones. If the heart is heavier than the feather, if it is weighted down with sin and falsehood, it tips the scale. And then comes Amit. Amit the Devourer is one of the most terrifying figures in Egyptian mythology. She is depicted as a chimera, the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a leopard or lion, the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. 3 of the most dangerous animals in Egypt combined into one demon. She sits beside the scales waiting. If the heart is heavy, Amit devours it. And this is true death. Not the death of the body that has already occurred, but the death of the soul. The person ceases to exist. They do not go to a place of suffering. They are simply annihilated, unmade, erased from existence. This is crucial. The Egyptian hell is not a place of eternal torture. It is non-existence. The worst punishment imaginable to Egyptians, who went to extraordinary lengths to preserve bodies and names, was to be forgotten, to cease to be. Amit represents that ultimate negation. However, the Duat itself, the underworld journey, contains suffering for those who fail its tests without reaching judgment. Various spells describe punishments for the wicked encountered in the Duat. The Book of Gates, another funerary text from the New Kingdom period, 1550 to 1077 BCE, describes 12 gates the sun god Ra passes through during his nightly journey through the Duat. In these regions, the blessed dead bask in Ra's light, but the damned burn. They are tied up, decapitated, their bodies thrown into pits of fire. The Book of Caverns, also from the New Kingdom, describes caverns in the Duat, where the enemies of Ra are imprisoned and tortured. One scene shows bound prisoners being burned. Another shows their souls, represented as bar birds, being annihilated. These texts suggest that while the virtuous dead proceed to judgment and possibly the field of reeds, the wicked suffer in the Duat itself, punished by demons under Ra's authority. One of the most detailed depictions comes from the tomb of Seti, Pharaoh, who ruled approximately 1294 to 1279 BCE. The walls show the Duat's geography in intricate detail. There are lakes of fire described as the place of destruction. There are pits where the damned are held upside down. There are serpents guarding gates, and demons with knives waiting to dismember souls who lack the correct spells for safe passage. But even these punishments were not necessarily eternal. Some texts suggest that after a period of suffering, the wicked might be annihilated, the ultimate punishment, rather than tortured forever. The Egyptian mind seemed unable to conceive of eternal conscious torment. Either you passed to paradise, or you suffered in the Duat and were eventually destroyed, or Amit devoured you immediately. The concept of judgment based on earthly behavior was revolutionary. Mesopotamia had hints of divine judgment, but Egypt made it central. Your fate depended not on proper burial alone, not on offerings from the living, but on how you had lived. The negative confession in Spell 125 lists 42 declarations the deceased must make. I have not committed sin. I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not stolen. I have not slain men or women. I have not made anyone suffer. I have not damaged the offerings in the temples. I have not added to the weight of the balance. I have not taken milk from the mouths of children. The list continues, covering ethics, both ritual, temple offerings, and moral, treatment of others. This is moral accountability in the afterlife. The idea that how you behave toward other humans matters to the gods and determines your eternal fate. This Egyptian development, judgment, the weighing of deeds, punishment or reward based on earthly behavior, would influence Judaism, Christianity, and Islam profoundly. When these religions developed their concepts of afterlife judgment, they were building on foundations laid by Egypt millennia earlier. The Egyptians also contributed the geography of hell. Not a simple dark house, but a complex realm with regions, gates, guardians, obstacles. A journey, not a static destination. This idea that reaching the afterlife requires passage through dangerous territory appears in Greek mythology, in Christian visions of purgatory, in Islamic descriptions of the path to paradise or hell. Egypt invented the underworld as a structured, navigable, if dangerous, place. By the time Egypt fell to Rome in 30 BCE, its religious influence had already spread throughout the Mediterranean. Greek and Roman philosophers studied Egyptian beliefs. Early Christians in Egypt absorbed concepts from the ancient religions surrounding them: the weighing of souls, judgment by divine authority, lakes of fire, demons with specific roles. These Egyptian innovations became part of the vocabulary of hell that would dominate human imagination for the next 2,000 years. Chapter 3. The Classical Underworld, Greece and Rome. When the Greeks began writing about the afterlife in the 8th century BCE, they created something different from both Mesopotamia and Egypt. The Greek underworld, Hades, named after the god who ruled it, was a complex realm with different regions for different types of dead. Not everyone suffered equally. Not everyone was judged. The Greeks introduced nuance, levels, a spectrum of afterlife experience based on who you were and how you died. Our earliest detailed source is Homer's Odyssey, composed approximately 800 to 700 BCE. In Book 11, Odysseus travels to the entrance of the underworld to consult the prophet Tiresias. What he describes is bleak. The dead are strengthless shades, mere shadows of their living selves. They must drink blood to gain enough strength to speak. They remember their lives, but cannot truly participate in existence. Achilles, the greatest Greek hero, tells Odysseus, "I would rather be a hired servant in the house of a landless man than king of all these dead." This Homeric underworld resembles the Mesopotamian Kur, a place of diminished existence, joyless and shadowy. But Homer introduces divisions. The wicked suffer specific punishments. Tantalus stands in a pool of water beneath fruit trees, but when he reaches for fruit, it withdraws. When he bends to drink, the water recedes. He is eternally hungry and thirsty, punished for serving his son as food to the gods. Sisyphus pushes a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll down just before reaching the top, forcing him to begin again eternally, punished for his deceitfulness and arrogance toward the gods. These are the first clearly articulated punishments that fit the crime. Tantalus, who violated hospitality and deceived gods with a terrible meal, suffers eternal hunger. Sisyphus, who believed himself clever enough to cheat death, performs pointless labor forever. This concept, that afterlife punishment reflects earthly sin, would become fundamental to later hell traditions. By the time we reach Plato in the 4th century BCE, Greek understanding of the afterlife had evolved significantly. In The Republic, written around 380 BCE, Plato describes the myth of a soldier who died in battle, returns to life and describes what he witnessed in the afterlife. Souls are judged. The just ascend to heaven for 1,000-year reward. The unjust descend beneath the earth for 1,000-year punishment. Then both groups are reincarnated. The most wicked, tyrants, murderers, those who committed sacrilege, are cast into Tartarus, a prison far below Hades, where they suffer torments forever. Tartarus becomes crucial in Greek hell tradition. It existed in mythology before Plato, but he systematizes it. Tartarus is not merely the underworld, it is the underworld's prison, as far below Hades as heaven is above earth. Here the Titans were imprisoned after their war with the Olympian gods. Here the truly wicked suffer. Virgil's Aeneid, written around 20 BCE, provides the most detailed tour of the classical underworld. In Book 6, the hero Aeneas descends to the underworld with the Sibyl as his guide. This text would directly inspire Dante's Inferno 13 centuries later, but Virgil's vision is distinctly Roman, synthesizing Greek tradition with Roman values. Virgil describes the geography precisely. The underworld is reached by crossing the river Acheron on Charon's ferry, but only if you've been properly buried and can pay Charon's fee, a coin placed in the corpse's mouth. The dog Cerberus guards the entrance, preventing the living from entering and the dead from leaving. Beyond the entrance are different regions. The fields of mourning hold those who died of unrequited love. The fields of war hold soldiers, unbaptized infants. This is Virgil writing in an era when Christianity was emerging. Dwell in limbo, not suffering, but not in paradise. Then come the two extreme destinations. The Elysian Fields, also called the Isles of the Blessed, are paradise for heroes and the virtuous. Here, life is perfect, with eternal spring, games, music, no suffering or want. But on the other path, past the three-headed dog, down into darkness, is Tartarus. Virgil describes its walls, triple-walled, surrounded by a river of fire, the Phlegethon. Inside, he hears groaning, the crack of whips, the dragging of chains. The Sibyl describes the tortures within. Titios, whose liver is eternally eaten by vultures because he assaulted the goddess Leto. Ixion, bound to an eternally spinning wheel of fire for attempting to seduce Hera. The Danaides, sisters who murdered their husbands and are condemned to fill a jar with water using leaky sieves forever. Rhadamanthus judges the dead in Tartarus, interrogating them and assigning punishments. The worst sinners suffer the worst torments. This is proportional justice in the afterlife. Not everyone goes to the same hell. Your punishment matches your crime. The Romans adopted Greek underworld traditions wholesale, but added their own emphasis. Roman poets and philosophers stressed that earthly behavior determines afterlife fate. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BCE, argued in The Republic and on the nature of the gods that belief in afterlife punishment encourages moral behavior. Whether or not gods exist, he suggested, believing they watch and will judge is socially useful. This cynical pragmatism about hell as social control would echo through history. By the time Christianity emerged in the 1st century CE, the classical underworld was thoroughly developed. A complex geography with rivers, gates, and guards, different regions for different types of dead, judgment determining fate, eternal reward for the virtuous in Elysium, eternal punishment for the wicked in Tartarus, and specific torments matching specific sins. All of this existed before the New Testament was written. All of this would influence Christian concepts of hell profoundly. One final Greek contribution, the idea that hell could be escaped through knowledge or heroism. Orpheus descended to retrieve his wife Eurydice. Heracles descended as one of his labors and returned. Odysseus visited the entrance. Aeneas made the journey. In Greek tradition, the underworld was terrifying, but not absolutely sealed. With the right guide, the right protection, the right knowledge, even the living could descend and return. This notion that hell can be navigated, that it has a geography knowable to mortals, persists in later traditions from Dante to modern fiction. The Greeks and Romans gave us hell as a structured, governed, knowable place. Not chaos, but order. Not random, but just. A place where earthly actions receive appropriate eternal consequences, where the dead exist in a complex society beneath the earth, where heroic individuals might venture and return with knowledge. This vision would shape Western imagination for 2 millennia. Chapter 4: Jewish Sheol and the Emergence of Gehenna. To understand Christian hell, we must first understand that ancient Judaism had very little concept of afterlife at all, and what concept existed was nothing like the fire and brimstone inferno Christianity would develop. The Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, mentions an afterlife realm called Sheol. But Sheol is not hell. It is closer to the Mesopotamian Kur, or Greek Hades, a shadowy place where all the dead go, regardless of virtue. There is no judgment, no punishment, no reward, just vague, continued existence in darkness beneath the earth. The word Sheol appears 66 times in the Hebrew Bible. Ecclesiastes 9:10 describes it. For in Sheol, where you are going, there is no working or planning or knowledge or wisdom. Psalm 88:10-12 asks, do you work wonders for the dead? Do the departed spirits rise up to praise you? Is your steadfast love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the darkness? The answer implied is no. Sheol is separation from God. It is not punishment. It is simply the absence of life and divine presence. Both righteous and wicked go there. King David and wicked Korah are both described as descending to Sheol. This is crucial. Ancient Judaism did not have a developed concept of hell as punishment. The focus was on earthly reward and punishment. Follow God's law and prosper in this life. Disobey and suffer in this life. What happens after death was murky, unimportant, barely discussed. This changes during the period of the Second Temple, roughly 500 BCE to 70 CE. During this era, Judaism encountered Persian Zoroastrianism, Greek philosophy, and experienced massive political upheaval. These forces transformed Jewish afterlife beliefs. Zoroastrianism, the Persian religion, had a clear heaven and hell. The righteous crossed the Chinvat bridge to paradise. The wicked fell from the bridge into a pit of torment. After the Babylonian exile, 586 to 538 BCE, when Jews lived under Persian rule, these concepts filtered into Jewish thought. By the time we reach the Book of Daniel, written around 167 to 164 BCE, we find this: "Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt." Daniel 12:2. This is the first clear biblical reference to different eternal fates: resurrection to life or resurrection to punishment. The concept of Gehenna emerges in this period. Gehenna, Greek transliteration of Hebrew Gehinnom, referred to a real place, the Valley of Hinnom, south of Jerusalem. In earlier periods, this valley had been a site where some Israelites practiced child sacrifice to foreign gods, an abomination explicitly condemned. Kings Ahaz and Manasseh were said to have sacrificed their sons there, 2 Chronicles 28:3, 33:6. King Josiah defiled the site to prevent further sacrifices, 2 Kings 23:10. By the Second Temple period, Gehenna had become a metaphor for divine punishment. The valley was reportedly used as a garbage dump where fires burned continuously, consuming refuse and bodies of criminals. Whether this is historically accurate or later legend is debated, but the imagery, continuous fire, smoke, destruction, became associated with the name Gehenna. Intertestamental Jewish texts, written between the Old and New Testaments, developed these ideas. The Book of Enoch, probably compiled between 300 to 100 BCE, contains elaborate descriptions of the afterlife. Enoch is taken on a tour of heaven and hell. He sees mountains of fire where fallen angels are imprisoned. He sees places of punishment for human sinners, valleys of fire, places of darkness, prisons where the wicked await final judgment. What's significant is that these are holding places. Final judgment has not yet occurred. At the end of time, there will be resurrection and judgment. Then the righteous receive eternal life, and the wicked receive final punishment, usually described as annihilation or eternal fire. The concept of annihilation is important. Many Jewish texts from this period suggest that the wicked are destroyed, not tortured forever. They burn in fire and cease to exist. This aligns with earlier Hebrew thought about Sheol being negation of existence. By the 1st century CE, when Jesus was teaching and the New Testament was being written, Judaism had multiple competing views of the afterlife. Traditional view, Sheol, where all the dead go, shadowy and neutral. Greek-influenced view, immortal souls that are judged, with the righteous going to paradise and the wicked to punishment. Pharisaic view, bodily resurrection at the end of time, followed by judgment and eternal life or destruction. Sadducee view, no afterlife at all. When you die, you're done. Essene view, as at Qumran, the righteous join the angels, the wicked are destroyed. Jesus used Gehenna as a warning. In the Gospels, he mentions it 12 times. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. Matthew 10:28. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with 2 hands to go to Gehenna, to the unquenchable fire. Mark 9:43. These sayings use Gehenna as the ultimate threat. Total destruction, not necessarily eternal conscious torment. The unquenchable fire may refer to fire that cannot be put out while burning, not fire that burns forever without consuming. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Luke 16:19-31, shows a different image. The rich man dies and is in Hades, being in torment. He sees Lazarus in Abraham's bosom, paradise. He begs for water, but is told a great chasm separates them. This suggests conscious suffering after death, not just waiting for judgment. The Book of Revelation, written around 95 CE, introduces the lake of fire. This is where death and Hades themselves are thrown, Revelation 20:14, along with anyone whose name is not in the Book of Life. The devil, the beast, and the false prophet are tormented day and night forever and ever. Revelation 20:10. This apocalyptic imagery, eternal torment in fire, would become central to Christian hell. But it's important to note that in Judaism itself, these ideas remained contested. Rabbinic Judaism, developing after the temple's destruction in 70 CE, continued to debate the nature of afterlife punishment. The Talmud mentions Gehenna as a place of punishment, but some texts suggest it lasts 12 months, after which the wicked are either annihilated or purified and admitted to the world to come. So Judaism's contribution to hell is complex. The name Gehenna, imagery of fire and smoke, the concept of judgment followed by different eternal fates, but often emphasizing destruction rather than eternal torture. Christianity would take these raw materials and construct something far more elaborate and terrifying. Chapter 5. Christian hell crystallizes. The New Testament provides fragments, images, warnings about hell, but it does not provide a systematic theology. That would come later, developed by early Christian theologians called the Church Fathers, who spent centuries debating, refining, and ultimately establishing what Christians would believe about eternal punishment. The earliest Christian writings after the New Testament show diverse views. The Didache, a Christian manual written around 100 CE, barely mentions the afterlife. The Shepherd of Hermas, written around 140 to 150 CE, suggests that some sinners might be purified rather than eternally damned. These early texts focus on repentance and living righteously, not on detailed hell geography. But as Christianity spread and encountered Greek philosophy, the need for systematic theology grew. How exactly does hell work? Who goes there? For how long? What happens to them? These questions demanded answers. Justin Martyr, writing around 150 to 160 CE, was one of the first to articulate a clear doctrine. In his first apology, he states that the souls of the wicked are punished after death in eternal fire. Not annihilated, punished consciously, forever. This was a significant development. Justin, trained in Greek philosophy, applied Greek concepts of the immortal soul to Christian teaching. If the soul is immortal and some souls are wicked, they must suffer eternally. Tertullian, writing around 200 CE in North Africa, went further. In On the Spectacles, he describes the joy Christians will feel in heaven watching the damned suffer in hell. He writes, "How shall I admire, how laugh, how rejoice, how exult, when I behold so many proud monarchs groaning in the lowest abyss of darkness, so many magistrates liquefying in fiercer flames than they ever kindled against the Christians." This is shocking to modern readers. But Tertullian was making a theological point. God's justice must be visible and satisfying. The wicked must receive proportionate punishment. Watching that punishment is not cruelty. It is witnessing divine justice fulfilled. Origen of Alexandria, writing 220 to 250 CE, offered a radically different view. In On First Principles, he suggested apokatastasis, universal restoration. Eventually, after however long their punishment requires, all souls, even Satan himself, will be purified and reconciled to God. Hell is corrective, not retributive. It is purgation through fire, not eternal torture. Origen's view was controversial. Many church leaders rejected it as undermining the gravity of sin and the necessity of urgent repentance. If everyone eventually gets to heaven regardless, why bother being good? But Origen's ideas influenced many, and for centuries, universal salvation remained a debated position within Christianity. Augustine of Hippo, writing 400 to 430 CE, essentially settled the debate for Western Christianity. In The City of God, Augustine argues that hell is eternal conscious torment with no hope of escape or annihilation. The damned suffer proportionate to their sins. There are degrees of torment, but all suffer forever. This is just because sin against an infinite God deserves infinite punishment. The damned, in their pride, would continue sinning even in hell if able, so their punishment must continue eternally. Augustine also addresses a question that had troubled many. How can the blessed in heaven be happy, knowing their loved ones suffer in hell? His answer: the blessed will have perfect understanding of divine justice. They will agree with God's decision and will not feel pity for those who rejected salvation. Their happiness will not be diminished by the sufferings of the damned, because they will recognize that justice is being served. This seems harsh to modern sensibilities. But Augustine was working within a logical framework. If God is perfectly just, his decisions must be correct. If souls in heaven retain earthly emotional attachments that conflict with God's justice, heaven would not be perfect bliss. Therefore, in perfection, the blessed must lose those conflicting emotions. By the 5th century, Christian hell had taken definable shape in Western theology. Location, beneath the earth, separated from heaven by an unbridgeable gulf. Nature, eternal fire that torments souls without consuming them. Inhabitants, Satan and his demons, human souls who died in mortal sin without repentance. Possibly unbaptized infants, though this was debated. Purpose, punishment for sin, demonstration of divine justice. Duration, eternal, with no possibility of escape, purification, or annihilation. Degrees, different levels of suffering based on the severity of earthly sins. Effect on the blessed. The saved in heaven understand and approve of hell's necessity, experiencing no diminishment of joy. Eastern Christianity developed somewhat differently. Greek-speaking theologians often emphasize theosis, union with God, as the goal of existence. Hell, in much Eastern thought, is not a place God created to punish, but the natural state of a soul that has rejected union with God. It is self-imposed separation, not externally imposed torture. God's love radiates to all, but those who have hardened themselves against it experience that love as burning, while those who have opened themselves to it experience it as light and joy. Gregory of Nyssa, writing in the late 4th century, sided with Origen's view of eventual universal restoration, though he was more cautious in expressing it. He suggested that hell's fire is purifying, and that after sufficient time, even the most wicked souls would be cleansed and reconciled. But Augustine's view triumphed in the West, codified by councils and popes. By 500 CE, Christian hell was firmly established, eternal, fiery, inescapable, inhabited by demons and the damned, and absolutely necessary for divine justice. One theological innovation deserves special attention: the harrowing of hell. This doctrine, based on 1 Peter 3:18-20 and 4:6, claims that between his crucifixion and resurrection, Christ descended into hell, or Hades, or Sheol. Terminology varied. There he preached to the spirits of the dead, and according to some versions, liberated the righteous who had died before his coming, Abraham, Moses, David, and others, bringing them to heaven. The harrowing appears in the Apostles' Creed. He descended into hell. Eastern icons depict Christ breaking down hell's gates, trampling them beneath his feet, pulling Adam and Eve from their tombs. This doctrine served multiple theological purposes. It explained where Old Testament righteous went before Christ's resurrection. It demonstrated Christ's victory over death and hell. It showed that salvation reached even beyond the grave. But the harrowing was a one-time event. After Christ's ascension, hell's gates were sealed. No further liberations. The doctrine provided narrative satisfaction. The great heroes of Jewish tradition were saved, without undermining hell's eternal nature for post-Christian sinners. By the time the Roman Empire officially Christianized in the 4th century, hell was not just theology, it was social policy. The threat of eternal damnation encouraged conversion. It justified persecution of heretics. Better to coerce someone into the true faith and save their soul than allow them to remain in error and burn forever. It provided ultimate sanction for moral behavior. Earthly punishment is temporary, but hell is eternal. The early church also developed purgatory, though that doctrine would not be fully articulated until medieval times. The concept, most Christians die with some unforgiven sins or unpaid penance. They are destined for heaven, but not yet worthy. Purgatory is a temporary place of purification through fire. It hurts, but it ends. It cleanses. Then, the soul proceeds to heaven. This was a pastoral innovation, offering hope to ordinary Christians who feared they were not holy enough for direct entrance to paradise, but did not deserve damnation. Purgatory is not in Scripture. It developed from early Christian practices of praying for the dead, the assumption being that such prayers could help those in intermediate states. 2 Maccabees 12:46 in the Catholic and Orthodox Old Testament mentions prayers for the dead, suggesting belief that such prayers were efficacious. From this practice grew theology. If prayers help the dead, they must be in a state where help is possible. Not heaven, no need for help, and not hell, beyond help. Therefore, an intermediate state must exist. By 500 CE, Christian afterlife geography had 3 tiers: heaven for the saved, purgatory for the saved, but not yet purified, and hell for the irredeemably damned. This structure would dominate Western imagination for the next 1,000 years. Chapter 6: Islamic Jahannam, the 7 levels. When Islam emerged in the 7th century CE in Arabia, it inherited influences from Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism, synthesizing them into a distinctive vision of the afterlife. Islamic hell, Jahannam, shares features with Jewish Gehenna and Christian Inferno, but has unique characteristics that reflect Islamic theology. The Quran, Islam's holy text revealed to the Prophet Muhammad between 610 to 632 CE, mentions Jahannam repeatedly. Unlike the Bible, which provides fragmentary hell references, the Quran describes the afterlife systematically. Judgment, paradise, and hell are central themes, mentioned in nearly every chapter. After death, souls remain in the grave in a state called barzakh, a barrier or waiting period until the day of resurrection. On that day, all the dead will be raised and judged by Allah. Each person's deeds will be weighed on a scale. Those whose good deeds outweigh bad will cross the Sirat, a bridge narrow as a hair and sharp as a sword, stretched over Jahannam. The righteous will cross safely to paradise, Jannah. The wicked will fall into the fire below. Jahannam is described in vivid, terrifying detail. The Quran emphasizes physical torment. It is a place of scorching fire. Quran 88:4, where the damned will be given boiling water to drink. 56:54, and garments of fire. 22:19. Their skins will be burned off, then replaced so they can feel pain again. Those who reject our signs, we shall soon cast them into the fire. As often as their skins are roasted through, we shall change them for fresh skins, that they may taste the penalty. 4:56. The damned will eat from the tree of Zakum, which has bitter fruit like molten brass. It will boil in their insides, like the boiling of scalding water. 44, 43 to 46. They will cry for death, but death will not come. They will beg for relief, but relief will be denied. And they will cry, O Malik, the guardian of hell, would that your Lord put an end to us. He will say, Nay, but you shall abide forever. 43:77. Jahannam has 7 levels, each for different categories of sinners. The levels are 1. Jahannam proper, for sinful Muslims who will eventually be released after purification. 2. Laza, for Christians described in the Quran as raging fire. 70:15. 3. Hutama, for Jews called the crushing one. 104:4-5. 4. Sa'ir, for Sabians and Zoroastrians, a blazing fire. 4:10. 5. Sakar, for those who neglected prayer, described as scorching. 74:42. 6. Jahim, for polytheists and idolaters, a fierce, blazing fire. 100:6-7. 7. Hawaya, the deepest level, for hypocrites who pretended faith while concealing disbelief, described as a bottomless pit or abyss. 101:9-11. These levels are hierarchical. The worst sinners, hypocrites who knew truth and rejected it, suffer the most. Polytheists, who never recognized God's unity, suffer severely. Monotheists, who erred in understanding God, Christians and Jews, from the Islamic perspective, suffer but less than polytheists. Sinful Muslims suffer the least and may eventually be released. This introduces a crucial Islamic concept. Hell is not necessarily eternal for everyone. Polytheists and unbelievers who died rejecting God remain in Jahannam forever. But Muslims who sinned but retained faith might be punished for a period, then released to paradise. Their punishment is corrective, not purely retributive. The Hadith, collections of Muhammad's sayings compiled in the centuries after his death, adds elaborate detail. One famous hadith describes the size of Jahannam. The fire will not be full until Allah puts his foot on it, and it will say, Enough, enough, enough. Sahih Bukhari. This metaphorical language suggests hell's vastness and insatiability. Angels called Zabaniya, 19 in number, guard Jahannam and torture the damned. The Quran describes them as stern and severe, who do not disobey Allah in what He commands them, but do what they are commanded. 66:6. They are not fallen angels. In Islam, angels cannot fall. They are created specifically to administer punishment, and they do so without mercy or hesitation because that is their purpose. The physical descriptions in the Quran are intense. The damned wear chains 70 cubits long, 96:30. They are dragged by their forelocks and feet, 55:41. They drink boiling water that tears their intestines, 47:15. They lie on beds of fire with fire covering them, 7:41. These are not metaphors in traditional Islamic interpretation. They are literal descriptions of what awaits those who reject Allah and die unrepentant. Islamic theology emphasizes that Jahannam is not unjust. Every soul condemned to it deserves its fate because they had knowledge of truth and rejected it, or they committed evil without repentance. Allah is described as the most merciful of those who show mercy, but also as severe in punishment. Justice requires that wickedness be punished. Mercy is available through repentance in life, but after death, judgment is final. One hadith describes intercession. On the day of judgment, the Prophet Muhammad will intercede for sinners, asking Allah to show mercy. Some Muslims who deserve hellfire will be spared through this intercession. Others who have already entered will be released, but this mercy applies only to Muslims who, despite their sins, maintained belief in Allah's unity and Muhammad's prophethood. Unbelievers receive no intercession. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes that the afterlife is the true life, and this life of the world is only an amusement and a play. Verily, the home of the hereafter, that is the life indeed. 2964. Earthly life is a test. The afterlife is reality. This urgency, that your eternal fate depends on earthly choices during a brief life, is meant to motivate constant awareness of God and moral behavior. Islamic scholars debated some details. The Mu'tazilite school, emphasizing divine justice, argued that Allah must reward good and punish evil, and hell's eternity demonstrates that justice. The Asharite school, emphasizing divine omnipotence, argued that Allah could forgive whom He wills, even without repentance, because He is absolutely sovereign. But both schools agreed that the Quran's descriptions of Jahannam are real, and that most of humanity will go there because most reject true faith. One striking difference from Christianity: Islam does not have purgatory. The barzakh is a waiting state, not a place of purification. Either you go to paradise or you go to hell. The only middle ground is for sinful Muslims who enter hell for a time, are purified through suffering, and then proceed to paradise. But this is not a separate place. It is hell itself, functioning as purgation for believers. Another difference: predestination. Islam teaches that Allah has written all destinies. He knows who will believe and who will disbelieve, who will go to paradise and who to hell. This raises theological problems. If Allah predestines some to hell, how is that just? Islamic theology responds that humans have moral agency in the moment of choice, even though Allah knows what they will choose. His knowledge does not cause their choice. They freely choose, and He judges accordingly. This paradox, divine foreknowledge and human free will, is acknowledged, but not fully resolved, similar to Christian debates on predestination. By the time Islamic civilization flourished in the 8th through 13th centuries, Jahannam was established in Islamic thought. 7 levels of varying intensity, eternal for unbelievers but possibly temporary for sinful Muslims, administered by merciless angels, described in vivid physical torments, balanced by the possibility of intercession for believers. This vision of hell served similar functions as in Christianity, motivating moral behavior, warning against sin, promising justice, and explaining why converting to the true faith is urgent. Chapter 7: Buddhist and Hindu Naraka, Eastern Hells. While Abrahamic religions developed concepts of eternal hell for unbelievers, South and East Asian religions created something different: temporary hells within cycles of reincarnation. Suffering is intense but not endless. Punishment is corrective, preparing the soul for rebirth. In Hinduism, Naraka is described in various texts. The oldest references appear in the Rig Veda, composed approximately 1500 to 1200 BCE, but detailed descriptions come much later, particularly in the Puranas, written between 300 to 1500 CE. The Garuda Purana, probably composed around 900 CE, describes 28 major narakas, each specializing in punishing particular sins. These are not permanent residences. Souls go to naraka after death, suffer in proportion to their earthly karma, the moral law of cause and effect, and then are reborn. Some of the Narakas described in the Garuda Purana, Tamisra, darkness. For those who robbed others or committed adultery, the soul is bound and beaten by Yama's servants until unconscious, then revived and beaten again. Raurava, fearful, for those who cause suffering, the soul is tormented by Ruru serpents. Mahajwala, great fire, for those who stole, the soul burns in fire. Krimibojana, worm food, for those who didn't honor guests or ate before feeding others. The soul is devoured by worms while unable to die. Kumbhipaka, cooked in a pot, for those who cooked living beings, the soul is boiled in oil. Asipatravana, forest of sword leaves, for those who deviated from righteous path. The soul walks through a forest where leaves are sharp blades that cut flesh. The descriptions are graphic, but the key difference from Abrahamic hell is temporariness. After suffering exhausts the negative karma, the soul is released and reborn. Rebirth might be as a human again, or as an animal, insect or plant, depending on remaining karma. Eventually, through cycles of birth, death, and rebirth, the soul can achieve moksha, liberation from the cycle entirely, union with the divine, ending all suffering. Naraka is administered by Yama, the god of death, assisted by Chitragupta, who keeps records of all deeds. When a soul arrives, Chitragupta reads the life record. Yama assigns the appropriate Naraka and duration. This is not arbitrary judgment, it is precise accounting. Every action has consequences. The punishment fits the crime exactly. Buddhism, which emerged in India around the 5th century BCE, adopted and adapted Hindu Naraka concepts. Buddhist texts describe multiple hell realms, usually 8 hot hells and 8 cold hells, plus numerous peripheral hells. The Devadutta Sutta, part of the Pali Canon, compiled in the 1st century BCE, describes King Yama, same name as Hindu Yama, but here a judge, not himself a god, interrogating the newly dead. He asks, "Did you not see the 5 messengers sent by heaven to warn you?" The messengers are an infant, birth brings suffering; an aged person, aging brings suffering; a sick person, illness brings suffering; a criminal being punished, actions have consequences; and a corpse, death comes to all. The sinner admits seeing these warnings, but ignored them. Yama then assigns punishment appropriate to the sins committed. The Buddhist hell realms include the hell of living beings, where the damned are attacked by guardians and each other, hacking at each other with weapons only to revive and endure it again. The black line, hell, where lines are drawn on the damned's body, then they are sawed or cut along those lines. The crushing hell, where the damned are crushed between mountains. The howling hell, where the damned burn in fire and scream. The great howling hell, like the howling hell, but more intense. The hot hell, where the damned are roasted in iron buildings. The very hot hell, like the hot hell but worse. The Avicii hell, the worst of the hot hells, reserved for the most serious sins like killing parents, killing an enlightened being, or causing schism in the Buddhist community. Here the damned burn continuously without relief. But even Avicii is not eternal. Buddhist texts calculate lifespans in hell realms, though the numbers are astronomically long, equivalent to many human lifetimes. One day in Avicii equals trillions of years. But eventually, the karma is exhausted and the soul is released for rebirth. The cold hells mirror the hot hells. Arbuda, blisters from cold. Nirabuda, blisters burst. Atata, shivering. Hahava, lamentations. Huhuva, chattering teeth from cold. Utpala, skin turns blue. Padma, skin cracks into pieces. And Mahapadma, skin cracks worse and body breaks apart. Again, these are temporary, lasting however long it takes to exhaust the negative karma that sent the soul there. Japanese Buddhism developed particularly elaborate hell imagery. The Jigoku Zoshi, hell scrolls, painted in the 12th century CE, depict various Buddhist hells in gruesome detail. Demons with animal heads torturing naked humans, people being sawed, crushed, boiled, frozen, and dismembered. These scrolls were used to teach Buddhist ethics, showing the consequences of breaking precepts. Chinese Buddhism similarly developed vivid hell imagery, influenced by indigenous Chinese beliefs about the afterlife. The Diyu, earth prison, in Chinese tradition has multiple levels, often described as 18 levels corresponding to different sins. Souls are judged by Yama, Yanluo Wang in Chinese, and his assistants. The punishments are precisely tailored. Liars have their tongues ripped out, thieves have their hands cut off, murderers are thrown in a cauldron of boiling oil. But again, these punishments are temporary. Chinese folk religion added the concept that living descendants could help souls in Diyu by performing rituals, offering prayers, and burning joss paper money. This offered comfort to the living and reinforced filial piety. Children must care for parents even after death. The crucial philosophical difference between Eastern and Western hells is purpose. In Abrahamic religions, hell is retributive justice, punishment for the sake of justice. In Hindu and Buddhist thought, naraka is corrective, suffering that burns away negative karma, preparing the soul for better rebirth. The goal is not vengeance, but purification. This difference reflects deeper theological contrasts. Abrahamic religions generally believe in one earthly life, one judgment, and eternal afterlife. Eastern religions believe in countless cycles of rebirth. One life is not enough to exhaust karma or achieve enlightenment. Hell is one stop on a journey that continues through many lifetimes. Another difference: in Hinduism and Buddhism, hells are not ruled by an evil being. Yama is not Satan. He is a judge, not a tempter. Demons in Buddhist hell are not fallen angels. They are manifestations of karma itself, punishing agents without moral status. Hell is not rebellion against God, but a natural consequence of cause and effect. You create your own hell through actions. You liberate yourself through understanding and right conduct. The variety of hell beliefs across Asian traditions is vast. Jainism, an Indian religion contemporary with early Buddhism, teaches that souls attach karmic particles through action. Heavy karma pulls souls down into hellish realms, while light karma allows them to rise. Tibetan Buddhism's Bardo Thodol, Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes intermediate states between death and rebirth, where the soul encounters terrifying, wrathful deities. But these are projections of one's own mind, not external torturers. Chinese Taoism developed its own afterlife bureaucracy, with multiple departments of hell corresponding to different sins, all managed with the same obsessive record-keeping as earthly Chinese government. This reflects cultural values. Even the cosmos operates through administration and proper procedure. What unites these diverse Eastern hell traditions is the principle: suffering is temporary and purposeful. Hell is not an end state, but a transition. The ultimate goal is not avoiding hell. It is escaping the cycle of rebirth entirely, reaching a state, moksha, nirvana, enlightenment, where neither hell nor heaven matters, because the self has transcended all conditional existence. This contrasts sharply with Western traditions, where heaven and hell are final destinations, eternal states. Eastern philosophies see both paradise and punishment as traps, gilded cages and torture chambers within the same prison. True liberation means leaving the prison entirely. Chapter 8: Medieval Christian Hell, Dante and the Nine Circles. By the medieval period, roughly 500 to 1500 CE, Christian hell was thoroughly developed in theology. But it was Dante Alighieri who gave hell its most enduring artistic form. His Divine Comedy, written 1308 to 1320, created a hell so vivid, so systematically organized, and so psychologically compelling that for many people, Dante's vision is hell, overshadowing even scripture. Dante was not writing theology, he was writing poetry, fiction. But he was synthesizing centuries of Christian thought about sin, punishment, and divine justice into a coherent vision. And he succeeded so completely that his inventions became absorbed into popular belief as if they had always been Christian doctrine. The Inferno, the first part of the Divine Comedy, describes Dante's journey through hell, guided by the Roman poet Virgil. The poem begins, "Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost." This is not physical geography, it is spiritual autobiography. Dante, at age 35, felt he had lost his way morally and spiritually. The journey through hell is a journey through the landscape of sin, recognizing evil in all its forms, before ascending to purgatory and paradise. Hell's entrance bears the famous inscription, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." These words capture hell's essence in Dante's vision, hopelessness. The damned know their fate is eternal, no appeal, no escape, no change, forever. Dante's hell is structured as 9 concentric circles descending into the earth, like an inverted cone, with each circle reserved for particular categories of sin, and with punishments becoming more severe as you descend. Before entering the first circle, Dante and Virgil pass through the vestibule, where the uncommitted dwell, souls who in life took no stand for good or evil, who lived entirely for themselves. These souls are not important enough for either heaven or hell proper. They chase a blank banner eternally, while being stung by wasps and hornets. This is Dante's invention, his contempt for moral cowardice. Then comes the river Acheron, the boundary. Charon, the ferryman, borrowed from Greek mythology, transports souls across. This is where hell proper begins. Circle 1. Limbo. Here dwell virtuous pagans, those who lived good lives but were born before Christ or died without baptism. They are not tortured. They exist in a noble castle, discussing philosophy and literature, but they are separated from God, which is their punishment. Dante places great classical authors and philosophers here: Homer, Virgil, his guide, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. Also unbaptized infants. This solves a theological problem. What happens to good people born in the wrong time or place? Dante's answer: they don't suffer torment, but they cannot reach heaven. It is a humane solution, though Augustine would have disagreed. He believed even unbaptized infants deserved hell for original sin. Circle 2. Lust. Here the lustful, those ruled by sexual desire, are blown about eternally by violent winds, never resting. Dante speaks with Francesca da Rimini, who fell in love with her husband's brother. She and her lover were murdered, and now they are bound together in the wind. The punishment reflects the sin. They were blown about by passion in life. They are blown about literally in death. Circle 3. Gluttony. The gluttonous lie in mud under freezing rain, guarded by Cerberus, the 3-headed dog from Greek mythology. They wallowed in food and drink in life. They wallow in filth in death. Circle 4. Greed. The avaricious and the wasteful, those who hoarded wealth and those who squandered it, push great weights in opposite directions around the circle, colliding, cursing each other, and pushing again. Money controlled them in life. Pointless labor is their fate in death. Circle 5. Wrath. The wrathful fight each other on the surface of the river Styx. The sullen, those who kept anger inside, lie beneath the water, gurgling, unable to speak. Anger that expressed itself violently in life is expressed eternally. Anger suppressed in life remains suppressed underwater. The first 5 circles constitute upper hell, where sins of incontinence, lack of self-control, are punished. These are serious sins, but not as grave as what follows. Past the river, Styx is the city of Dis, a fortress with burning towers. Demons guard its walls. Inside are lower hell circles, where sins of malice, deliberate evil, are punished far more severely. Circle 6, heresy. Those who denied the soul's immortality lie in burning tombs. Dante includes Epicureans and others who believed death ends consciousness. Their punishment, conscious suffering in fire, proving them wrong eternally. Circle 7, violence. This circle has 3 rings for violence against different victims. Ring 1, violence against neighbors, murderers, tyrants, warlords. They boil in a river of blood, shot by centaurs if they try to rise. Ring 2, violence against self, suicides. They are transformed into twisted trees. Harpies nest in their branches, eating leaves and causing pain. Dante's theology: the body is God's gift. Destroying it is violence against God's property. Therefore, suicides cannot have human form in hell. Ring 3, violence against God, nature, and art. This includes blasphemers, sodomites, and usurers. They walk on burning sand under a rain of fire. Circle 8, fraud. This circle, called Malabolge, evil ditches, has 10 concentric ditches, each for a particular type of fraud. Panderers and seducers, whipped by demons. Flatterers, immersed in excrement. Simonists, those who sold church offices, planted upside down with feet on fire. Sorcerers and false prophets, heads twisted backwards. Corrupt politicians, immersed in boiling tar hypocrites, wearing lead robes painted gold. Thieves, bitten by serpents, transforming into serpents themselves. Evil counselors trapped in flames. Sowers of discord, hacked apart by demons, falsifiers, diseased and itching. Each punishment reflects the sin. Heads twisted backward. You looked backward into the future through divination in life, so you look backward eternally. Immersed in excrement, you spoke shit in life, so you swim in shit forever. Circle 9, treachery. The lowest circle, frozen in ice. This is the Cocytus, a frozen lake where traitors are imprisoned. It has 4 rounds. Cana, traitors to family, frozen in ice up to their faces. Antenora, traitors to country, frozen similarly but able to move their heads. Ptolemaea, traitors to guests, frozen with only their faces above ice, tears freezing on their eyes. Judeca, traitors to benefactors, completely submerged in ice. At the center, in the deepest pit, is Satan himself. Dante's Satan is not the cunning tempter of popular imagination. He is grotesque, immobile, trapped waist-deep in ice at the universe's center. He has 3 faces, a twisted mockery of the Trinity. In each mouth he chews a traitor eternally. Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Christ, and Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Julius Caesar. Satan's 6 wings beat, creating the wind that freezes Cocytus. He weeps from 6 eyes, and the tears mix with blood from his meals. This Satan is pathetic, not terrifying. He is the ultimate prisoner. The greatest rebel is the most trapped. He is not hell's king. He is its chief victim. Dante's genius was making hell a reflection of human psychology. Each punishment fits not just the act, but the mentality behind it. The lustful lost self-control. They are controlled by wind. The gluttons lived for appetite. They rot in filth. The traitors destroyed bonds of trust. They are frozen in ice, alone, unable to connect. And Dante structured sins hierarchically based on malice. Incontinence, losing control to passion, is bad. Violence, deliberate harm, is worse. Fraud, harming through deception, is worse still. Treachery, betraying those who trusted you, is worst. This structure influenced Western thought profoundly. Dante codified an ethical ranking. It is worse to betray than to kill, worse to deceive than to rage. He placed Brutus in the lowest hell, not because he murdered, but because he murdered the man who trusted him. Dante's hell is also populated with specific historical and contemporary figures. He puts popes in hell, enemies in hell, even people still living in 1308, their souls already damned though bodies still walked earth. This made hell immediate, political, personal. It was not abstract theology. It was where real people you might know were going. The Inferno was spectacularly popular. It was copied, translated, illustrated, read aloud. It shaped how Christians imagined hell for the next 7 centuries. When modern people picture hell as having levels, punishments fitting sins, and Satan at the center, they are picturing Dante's invention, not biblical teaching. But Dante's hell is also merciful in its logic. Every soul there chose to be there. They were offered grace and refused it. They preferred sin to God. Hell is that preference eternalized. This is a more philosophically coherent version than some earlier Christian thought, which portrayed God as vengeful judge. In Dante, God does not send souls to hell. They go willingly, pursuing what they love more than God, discovering that what they love leads to misery. Chapter 9. Hell in Medieval Art, Bosch, Manuscripts and Doom Paintings. While Dante wrote hell, medieval artists painted it. And what they painted was far more visceral, more grotesque, more surreal than words could capture. Medieval hell art served multiple purposes: teaching the illiterate, terrifying sinners into repentance, expressing theological ideas visually, and sometimes, especially in the case of artists like Hieronymus Bosch, creating genuinely visionary artwork that transcends its didactic origins. The earliest Christian hell art appears in Byzantine mosaics and frescoes from the 6th century onward. The Last Judgment is a common theme: Christ enthroned, separating sheep from goats, righteous ascending to paradise on the right, damned descending to hell on the left. These early depictions show hell as a mouth, the mouth of hell, often depicted as a giant fish or dragon head swallowing sinners. This imagery comes from Jonah and the whale, but also from Job 41's description of Leviathan. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. The mouth of hell became standard iconography. Medieval mystery plays, theatrical performances of biblical stories, featured elaborate mechanical mouths belching smoke and fire, demon actors dragging sinners inside while others screamed. These performances terrified audiences, which was precisely the intention. Illuminated manuscripts provide countless hell depictions. The Winchester Psalter, created around 1150 CE in England, contains a famous image: demons torturing naked sinners with pitchforks and hooks, fire everywhere, demons with animal heads and human bodies. One demon pours molten metal down a sinner's throat. Another stokes fires. Christ presides above, perfectly serene, showing that this torture is divinely sanctioned justice. The Très Riche Heure du Duc de Berry, created 1412 to 1416 by the Limbourg brothers, includes a hell scene in its depiction of the Last Judgment. Demons are blue, black and green with grotesque features: horns, claws, bat wings, animal heads. They enthusiastically torment the naked damned. One demon plays a musical instrument made from human bones. This detail seems gleeful rather than grim, as if the artists enjoyed depicting creative cruelty. Doom paintings, depictions of the Last Judgment, appeared on the walls of medieval churches throughout Europe. These were not subtle. The typical doom painting, placed above the chancel arch so congregants saw it throughout the service, showed Christ in glory judging the world. To his right, angels guided the blessed toward heaven, often depicted as a beautiful garden or golden city. To his left, demons dragged screaming sinners toward hell's mouth, where more demons waited with implements of torture. Inside the mouth, fire, cauldrons, chains, and creative punishments awaited. These paintings were meant to provoke fear. Medieval preachers pointed to them during sermons. You see there on the left? That is where you will go if you continue in sin. For a largely illiterate population, these images communicated hell's reality more powerfully than any sermon. The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch, painted around 1490 to 1510, is perhaps the most famous hell painting. This triptych, 3 hinged panels, shows in its left panel the Garden of Eden. In the center panel, a bizarre landscape of earthly pleasures, and in the right panel, hell. Bosch's hell is unlike anything before it. It is not just fire and demons with pitchforks. It is surreal nightmare. There is a giant pair of ears with a knife between them, marching on legs. There is a bird-headed demon sitting on a thrown toilet, eating sinners and defecating them into a pit. There is a musical instrument that tortures souls. There is a man crucified on a harp. Strange hybrid creatures, part human, part animal, part machine, populate the landscape. Buildings burn, ice and fire coexist. Nothing makes sense. Everything is wrong. Art historians debate Bosch's intentions. Was he teaching orthodox theology? Was he a heretic expressing hidden meanings? Was he simply a brilliant artist creating nightmare imagery to express the incomprehensibility of damnation? The painting works on all levels. It is theologically correct. Sin leads to hell. But it is also psychologically true. Sin creates inner chaos, a world where nothing makes sense, where logic breaks down, where the self becomes fragmented and monstrous. One striking detail in Bosch's hell: many demons have human faces or wear monks' habits. This suggests that humans become demons, or that religious figures can be damned, or that evil hides behind respectable appearance. It is a dark suggestion, more psychologically sophisticated than most medieval art. Medieval hell art also depicted specific torments for specific sins, similar to Dante. A fresco in the Cathedral of Albi, France, painted around 1500, shows gluttons forced to eat toads and serpents, the proud broken on a wheel, the lustful roasted on a spit, the greedy boiled in cauldrons of molten gold, the slothful thrown into ice, the wrathful torn apart by demons, the envious immersed in freezing water. These punishments are precise moral lessons. You desired gold. You will have it, molten forever. You burned with lust. You will burn literally. The Sistine Chapel's Last Judgment by Michelangelo, painted 1536 to 1541, is a later but related work. Michelangelo shows Charon, the ferryman from classical mythology, beating souls into his boat to ferry them to hell. He shows demons dragging sinners down by their genitals, by their hair, by their limbs. But Michelangelo's damned are not grotesque. They are athletic, idealized human forms contorted in agony. Even in torment, they are beautiful. This Renaissance humanism in hell art is striking. Humans retain dignity even in damnation. The psychological impact of centuries of hell art on medieval and Renaissance Europeans cannot be overstated. From childhood, people saw these images. They internalized them. Hell was not abstract theology. It was vivid, visual, always present. Churches used art to teach and terrify, and it worked. Fear of hell, reinforced weekly by seeing it painted on church walls, powerfully motivated moral behavior and church obedience. But the art also reveals something else: human fascination with the grotesque. Artists did not have to paint hell in such creative, disturbing detail. They chose to. Bosch, in particular, seems to have delighted in inventing bizarre torments. This suggests that hell art served not just religious purposes but psychological ones. It allowed exploration of taboo imagery, of violence, of the body in extremis, under the safe label of moral instruction. By the late medieval period, hell art had created a visual vocabulary that would persist. Demons with horns and pitchforks, fire and ice, the mouth of hell, sinners categorized by sin and punished appropriately, Satan as monstrous figure presiding, and always the emphasis on physical torment. This vocabulary would be carried forward into Renaissance art, Protestant propaganda, Victorian illustration, and eventually 20th century film. Chapter 10. Protestant Reformation and Hell's Political Use. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg in 1517, he ignited a religious revolution that would splinter Western Christianity and, in the process, transform how people thought about hell. Luther's initial objection was to indulgences, the Catholic practice of reducing time in purgatory through payments to the church or performance of good works. His Thesis 27 stated, "They preach only human doctrines, who say that as soon as the money clinks into the money chest, the soul flies out of purgatory." Luther argued that only God grants forgiveness, not the church, and certainly not for money. But Luther's theological revolution went further. He emphasized salvation by faith alone, sola fide, not by works. This undercut the entire structure of Catholic purgatory, which assumed that good works and prayers could reduce punishment after death. If salvation depends only on faith in Christ, then either you are saved, going to heaven, or damned, going to hell. No middle ground, no purgatory, no indulgences. Luther did not reject hell. He believed in it absolutely, but he rejected the Catholic idea that humans could influence who went there or how long anyone suffered. God alone decides. Human righteousness does not earn salvation. Christ's sacrifice saves, and faith in that sacrifice is the sole requirement. This had radical implications. If only faith matters, then the entire Catholic system of masses for the dead, prayers to saints for intercession, and pilgrimages to reduce purgatory time became useless superstition. Protestants closed purgatory. After death, immediate judgment sends you to heaven or hell. Final. John Calvin, another major reformer, went further. He developed the doctrine of predestination. Before creation, God elected some souls for salvation and others for damnation. Your earthly choices do not change this. The elect will believe and be saved. The reprobate will not believe and will be damned. Both outcomes glorify God. The saved demonstrate his mercy. The damned demonstrate his justice. This is harsh theology. Calvin defended it by arguing that all humans deserve damnation due to original sin inherited from Adam. No one merits salvation. That God saves anyone is pure grace. That he does not save everyone is pure justice. If you find this unfair, Calvin would say you do not understand the depth of human depravity or the sovereignty of divine will. Calvinist theology led to the question, how do I know if I am elect? The answer, you cannot know with certainty, but living a godly life, experiencing faith, and doing good works are evidence, not cause, of election. This created anxiety, but also motivation to demonstrate through behavior that you were among the chosen. Protestant hell eliminated purgatory's hope. In Catholicism, even if you died with unforgiven sins, you might eventually reach heaven after purgatory. In Protestantism, you are saved or damned at death. Period. This made hell more urgent and absolute. Protestant preachers used hell liberally. Jonathan Edwards's sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, delivered in Massachusetts in 1741, is perhaps the most famous hell sermon in English. Edwards described God holding sinners over hell's pit like a man holds a spider over fire. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. This was not subtle. Edwards wanted his congregation to feel terror. Many listeners reportedly wept, cried out, or fainted. The sermon sparked religious revival as Edwards intended. Fear of hell, vividly expressed, motivated conversion. Protestant reformers also used hell politically. During the Reformation, both Catholics and Protestants printed propaganda showing their enemies in hell. Catholic posters showed Luther being dragged to hell by demons. Protestant posters showed the Pope in hell. Both sides portrayed religious warfare as cosmic battle. If you follow the wrong doctrine, hell awaits. The English Reformation under Henry VIII was particularly brutal. When England broke with Rome in 1534, Catholic martyrs who refused to accept Henry as head of the church were executed. Protestant propaganda depicted Catholic bishops and cardinals burning in hell for their idolatry and superstition. Later, when Catholic Queen Mary I took the throne, 1553 to 1558, and executed Protestants, Catholic propaganda showed Protestant heretics in hell. John Fox's Actes and Monuments, commonly called Fox's Book of Martyrs, published 1563, documented Protestant martyrs burned by Catholic authorities. The book included woodcut illustrations showing the martyrs' peaceful deaths, contrasted with their persecutors' damnation. One illustration shows the soul of a Protestant martyr ascending to heaven, while the Catholic bishops who burned him are dragged by demons to hell. This propaganda served to demonize opponents, literally. It was not enough to say the other side was wrong theologically. They had to be shown as destined for hell, as in league with demons, as beyond redemption. This justified violence. If your enemy is going to hell anyway, killing them might even be merciful, preventing them from leading others astray. The doctrine of hell also motivated missions. If most of humanity is going to hell, and if preaching the gospel is the only way to save them, then evangelism becomes urgently necessary. Protestant and Catholic missionaries carried their faith to the Americas, Africa, and Asia, often justifying colonialism as necessary to bring salvation to the heathen. Better to conquer and convert than allow entire populations to go to hell in ignorance. This created theological problems. What about people who lived before Christ? What about those who never heard the gospel? Augustine had said they go to hell. God is not obligated to save anyone, and ignorance is no excuse. Some later theologians suggested that God judges the unevangelized by their response to natural revelation, the evidence of God in creation. But this was contested. The discovery of the Americas raised this issue acutely. Millions of people had lived and died in the New World without hearing of Christ. Were they all in hell? Some Christians said yes, tragically, but justly. Others argued that God must have provided special revelation. Still others suggested that virtuous pagans might be saved through Christ's atonement without explicit knowledge of him. Controversial but more merciful. By the 17th century, Christianity had fractured into dozens of denominations, each with slightly different hell doctrines. All agreed hell existed. All agreed it involved eternal suffering. But they disagreed on who went there, whether predestination decided it, whether infants went there, whether ignorance excused, and whether hell's primary purpose was justice or deterrence. Hell remained central to Christian life. It motivated moral behavior, church attendance, confession of sins, missionary work, religious wars, and political control. Fear of hell was a tool of social order. Threatening people with eternal torment was effective governance, whether the threat came from church or state. Chapter 11: Victorian Spiritualism and Hell Visits. By the Victorian era, roughly 1837 to 1901, Western society was transforming rapidly. Industrialization, scientific advancement, and Enlightenment rationalism challenged traditional religious authority. And yet, paradoxically, this era saw an explosion of interest in the supernatural, including claims of contact with the afterlife, both heaven and hell. Spiritualism emerged in the 1840s, beginning in Hydesville, New York, where the Fox sisters claimed to communicate with spirits through rappings. The movement spread throughout America and Britain. By the 1850s, seances were fashionable entertainment among all social classes. Mediums claimed to contact the dead, relay messages, and sometimes provide descriptions of the afterlife. Spiritualists generally promoted a comforting theology. There is no hell, or if there is, it is temporary. The spirit world has different spheres. Less developed souls dwell in lower, darker spheres. More developed souls in higher, brighter spheres. All souls progress upward through moral development. Eventually, everyone reaches the highest sphere, which is essentially heaven. This contradicted traditional Christianity, but appealed to Victorians unsettled by harsh doctrines of eternal damnation. However, some spiritualist accounts described hellish lower spheres. Andrew Jackson Davis, called the John the Baptist of Spiritualism, published The Great Harmonia in 1850, describing his visions of the afterlife received in trance states. He claimed the lowest sphere was dark, cold, and inhabited by undeveloped spirits who still clung to earthly vices. They suffered not from divine punishment, but from their own moral poverty. But this was temporary. Through help from higher spirits, even these souls would eventually progress. Other mediums described darker visions. In seances, some spirits allegedly described experiences resembling traditional hell, darkness, isolation, suffering, regret. But almost always, the message was that this was self-imposed and escapable through spiritual development. The Victorian era also saw claims of near-death experiences, though that term was not used yet. George Washington Carver, in 1849, published an account of a man who was pronounced dead, revived, and described visiting hell. He saw eternal fire, heard screaming, and encountered demons. This account was used by Christian ministers to argue against spiritualism's comfortable universalism. Victorian novels explored hell. Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, 1843, shows Scrooge a vision of his possible afterlife. Not traditional hell, but a fate of wandering as a ghost, chained, unable to help suffering humanity, tormented by missed opportunities for good. This is psychological hell, regret, isolation, inability to change the past. Victorian science also began examining claims of afterlife contact. The Society for Psychical Research, founded in London in 1882, investigated mediums, seances, and claims of spirit communication. They approached the subject skeptically, but open-mindedly, documenting evidence and exposing fraud. Many mediums were proven fraudulent, using hidden accomplices, tricks, and cold reading. But some cases remained unexplained. The Victorian obsession with death and the afterlife reflected the era's anxieties. Industrialization had uprooted traditional communities. Scientific discoveries challenged religious certainty. Death rates, especially child mortality, remained high despite medical advances. People desperately wanted assurance that death was not the end, that loved ones continued somewhere, that morality mattered beyond this life. Hell remained part of mainstream Christian preaching. Victorian sermons frequently emphasized eternal punishment. But there was also growing discomfort. Charles Spurgeon, the famous Baptist preacher, gave a sermon in 1855 titled The Resurrection of the Dead, in which he described hell's eternity. Sinner, if you die impenitent, you will lift up your eyes in hell forever. There is no hope for you. Through ages and ages upon ages you must suffer the wrath of God. But Spurgeon himself seemed troubled by this. In another sermon, he admitted, "I have often been asked, how can you reconcile the existence of hell with the love of God? I cannot. I have never tried." This honesty reveals the theological tension. Belief in eternal hell increasingly conflicted with belief in a loving God. Some Victorian theologians began arguing for conditional immortality or annihilationism. Only the saved receive eternal life. The damned are ultimately destroyed, not tortured forever. This seemed more just and more compatible with divine love. But it remained a minority view, considered suspect by mainstream denominations. Victorian hell also appeared in art and illustration. Gustave Doré's engravings for Dante's Inferno, published 1861, became the definitive visual representation. Doré's hell was vast, dark, architecturally complex, and populated by countless suffering souls. His images combined classical precision with romantic atmosphere, creating a hell that was terrifying, but also somehow beautiful, aesthetically compelling, rather than merely grotesque. These illustrations were widely reproduced, appearing in books, on walls, in sermons. For millions of Victorians, Doré's vision was hell. It shaped imagination more than scripture, more than theology, perhaps more than anything except Dante's original text. Victorian occultists also explored hell. Aleister Crowley, though his major work came slightly later, early 1900s, began his occult career in the Victorian era. He and others in magical orders like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn practiced rituals supposedly contacting spiritual entities, including demons. Their descriptions of such encounters read like hell visits: oppressive atmosphere, malevolent intelligences, visions of suffering and darkness. But for these occultists, demons were not necessarily evil. They were forces of nature, amoral, powerful, dangerous, if not properly controlled, but not inherently opposed to humanity. This represented a major shift from Christian demonology, which saw demons as fallen angels, servants of Satan, devoted to human damnation. By the end of the Victorian era, hell remained doctrinally central to Christianity, but culturally it was beginning to weaken. The horrors of World War I, 1914 to 1918, just beyond the Victorian period, would further erode belief. How could hell be worse than the trenches? How could a loving God create hell after allowing such earthly suffering? These questions would dominate 20th century theology, but the Victorians bequeathed to modernity a complex hell legacy. Doré's vivid images, spiritualism's comforting alternatives, scientific skepticism about afterlife claims, theological discomfort with eternal torture, and popularization of ghost stories and occult practices that treated the afterlife as explorable territory rather than absolute divine decree. Chapter 12. Modern Psychology and the Death of Literal Hell. In the 20th century, hell underwent a transformation more radical than any previous theological development. It became metaphor. For many Western Christians, and for secular people entirely, hell ceased to be a literal place and became a psychological state, a symbol of alienation from meaning, a literary device, or simply an abandoned belief. This shift had multiple causes. World War I shattered Victorian optimism. The scale of industrial slaughter, millions dead, often for negligible territorial gains, made Europeans question God's goodness or existence. If God allowed this, what moral authority did he have? And if hell is God's creation, what does that say about divine character? Sigmund Freud, writing in the early 20th century, offered psychological explanations for religious beliefs. In The Future of an Illusion, 1927, he argued that religion, including hell belief, arises from humans' inability to accept mortality and need for father figure authority. Hell is wish fulfillment. We want the wicked punished, even if earthly justice fails. So we invent cosmic justice. But it is projection, not reality. Carl Jung, Freud's former student, took a different approach. He saw religious imagery, including hell, as expressions of the collective unconscious, universal, human, psychological patterns. Hell represents the shadow self, the repressed darkness everyone carries. Encountering hell in dreams or visions means confronting one's own capacity for evil. It is therapeutic metaphor, not literal geography. Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist play No Exit, 1944, contains the famous line, "Hell is other people." Sartre depicts hell as an elegant drawing room where three people are locked together forever. No physical torture. The torture is psychological. Being trapped with people who see you as you truly are, unable to deceive, unable to escape their judgment. This is hell as alienation, as the inability to control how you are perceived and judged. C.S. Lewis, a Christian apologist writing mid-20th century, offered a sophisticated defense of hell. In The Problem of Pain, 1940, and The Great Divorce, 1945. He argued that hell is not divine torture chamber, but the logical consequence of rejecting God. God does not send people to hell. They choose it by choosing self over God. Hell is that choice extended into eternity. It is locked from the inside. Lewis wrote, "There are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' and those to whom God says, 'In the end, thy will be done.'" This makes hell more palatable. It is freely chosen, not imposed. But critics note that few people consciously choose damnation. Most simply fail to meet theological requirements through ignorance, cultural conditioning, or human weakness. Is eternal punishment proportionate to finite earthly failures? By the mid-20th century, many mainstream Protestant denominations and liberal Catholic theologians began softening hell doctrine. Some suggested universalism, all will eventually be saved. Others suggested annihilationism, the damned cease to exist rather than suffering forever. Still others treated hell as metaphor for alienation from God, real in some sense, but not literal fire. The Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 1965, modernized Catholic teaching, though it retained hell doctrine. The Catechism affirms hell's existence, but emphasizes God's mercy and states that while we must accept hell is possible, we may hope all are saved. This is careful language. Hell exists, orthodoxy maintained, but perhaps empty, pastoral hope expressed. Conservative Protestantism, especially American evangelicalism, maintained traditional hell belief. Preachers like Billy Graham preach damnation but emphasize that accepting Jesus Christ guarantees salvation, available to anyone, making hell avoidable. This turn or burn evangelism used hell as motivation, but coupled it with an easy escape route: say a prayer, accept Jesus, be saved. Near-death experience research, beginning with Raymond Moody's Life After Life, 1975, documented thousands of accounts of people who clinically died and revived. Most described positive experiences, tunnels, light, deceased relatives, feelings of peace. But some described negative experiences, darkness, fear, disturbing entities. Researchers debated whether these were glimpses of actual afterlife or brain chemistry at death's threshold. Religious interpretations varied. Christians noted that positive experiences resembled heaven descriptions, and negative experiences resembled hell. Skeptics noted that experiences matched cultural expectations. Christians saw Jesus, Hindus saw Hindu deities, suggesting psychological rather than objective reality. Popular culture trivialized hell. Films, television, and literature used hell as setting for dark comedy, action-adventure, or horror without theological seriousness. Dante's Inferno inspired video games where players battle through hell's levels. The television series Lucifer portrayed Satan as a charming nightclub owner in Los Angeles. Hell became aesthetic, a vibe, not a doctrine. This cultural shift reflects secularization. For many people in developed Western countries, hell simply does not factor into daily thinking. It is a relic of superstitious past, an abandoned belief alongside flat earth and demonic illness causes. Surveys consistently show declining hell belief, even among churchgoers. A 2015 Pew Research survey found that only 58% of American Christians believe in hell. And even among those who believe, many struggle to accept eternal conscious torment. Theological debates continue. Annihilationism has gained support among some evangelical scholars. Universalism, while historically considered heresy, has articulate defenders like theologian David Bentley Hart, who argues that infinite punishment for finite sins contradicts divine justice and love. Orthodox Christianity still officially teaches eternal hell, but many clergy avoid preaching it, focusing instead on God's love and grace. Some theologians propose that hell's eternity means timelessness rather than infinite duration. The damned experience their state as eternal even if, from God's perspective, it ends. Others suggest hell's fire is metaphorical for psychological anguish of separation from God. Still others propose that hell exists but is empty. Christ's atonement was effective for all, whether they consciously accepted it or not. These theological gymnastics reflect discomfort. Modern ethical sensibilities balk at eternal torture. The analogy often used, if a parent burned their child for misbehavior, we would call that evil. How then is God, the perfect parent, justified in eternal burning? Defenders respond that the analogy fails. Children are innocent and limited in their understanding, while adult sinners with full knowledge deserve punishment. But this response satisfies fewer people each generation. Hell's decline in secular culture is nearly complete. But hell remains in three domains: conservative religious communities where traditional doctrine holds, philosophical and literary analysis of religious history, and psychological metaphor for inner suffering. Modern psychology, particularly existential and humanistic branches, describes hell states: depression, anxiety disorders, PTSD, addiction. These are experienced as hellish, inescapable suffering, loss of control, darkness, isolation. Whether these psychological hells relate to theological hell is debated, but the language borrows from religious tradition because religious tradition captured something true about human experience of severe suffering. Hell also survives in religious extremism. ISIS and similar groups use hell threats to motivate followers and justify violence against unbelievers. Their hell doctrine is medieval in severity, drawn from strict interpretations of Islamic texts. This shows that hell, in its most literal form, remains a powerful tool of control and motivation when societies are less educated and more religiously dogmatic. The future of hell is unclear. In secularizing Western countries, it may become fully metaphorical, retained as cultural reference, but emptied of belief. In conservative religious communities and developing countries where traditional faith remains strong, it may persist as literal doctrine. The divide between these worlds, secular metaphorical hell and religious literal hell, is one of many fractures in global religious landscape. We have traveled 5,000 years, from Sumerian Kur to Christian Inferno to modern metaphor. We have examined Mesopotamian houses of dust, Egyptian judgment halls, Greek Hades, Jewish Gehenna, Christian fire and ice, Islamic Jahannam, Buddhist Naraka, Dante's 9 circles, medieval art, Victorian seances, and 20th century psychology, we have seen hell transform from neutral destination for all the dead to elaborate system of eternal torture, to psychological state, to abandoned belief, to metaphor for suffering. What have we learned? Let me separate what we can verify from what we cannot. What we know. Every major civilization developed afterlife beliefs involving suffering or darkness for some or all of the dead. This is not coincidence. It reflects universal human experiences of death, fear, injustice, and desire for meaning. These beliefs evolved over time, influenced by cultural contact, political needs, and theological development. Hell is not a fixed eternal truth revealed once. It is a human construction refined across millennia. Hell beliefs served multiple social functions, explaining death, motivating moral behavior, providing justice when earthly justice failed, enforcing social control, and offering comfort that death is not final annihilation. Religious texts describing hell are historical documents reflecting their authors' beliefs and times, not necessarily accurate descriptions of objective reality. The Quran's Jahannam tells us what 7th century Muslims believed. Dante's Inferno tells us what 14th century Christian Italy imagined. Neither proves hell's literal existence. The diversity of hell conceptions, Mesopotamian dust-eating, Greek shadowy Hades, Christian fire, Buddhist temporary punishment, Islamic 7 levels, suggests cultural invention rather than discovery of objective fact. If hell were objectively real and observable, we would expect more consistency. What we cannot know, whether any afterlife exists at all. Consciousness after death remains unproven scientifically. Near-death experiences are intriguing but not conclusive. They could reflect brain chemistry rather than actual journey to another realm. Whether, if afterlife exists, it includes hell. Some religious traditions emphasize heaven or reincarnation without hell. If afterlife exists, its nature remains unknown. Whether any specific hell doctrine, Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, or other, is accurate, religions make mutually exclusive claims. They cannot all be right. They might all be wrong. What we believe, this is personal. I am a historian, not a theologian or evangelist. I have presented what humans have believed about hell across cultures and centuries. Whether you believe hell exists, whether you fear it, whether you think it metaphorical or literal, is your decision. But I will offer observations. Hell belief clearly causes suffering. People live in terror of damnation, their own or loved ones. Parents fear dead children are in hell for dying unbaptized. People of one faith fear those of another faith are damned. This anxiety is real and documented. If hell does not exist, this is unnecessary suffering caused by false belief. If hell does exist, the anxiety is proportionate to the risk, but the suffering itself is unquestionable. Hell belief has motivated both good and evil. It has inspired charity, missionary work, moral reform, and art. It has also justified wars, torture, oppression, and psychological abuse. Whether the good outweighs the evil depends on your calculus and values. Hell belief has declined in modern West, primarily due to ethical objections, not disproof. Modern people increasingly find eternal torture incompatible with divine love. This is an ethical evolution. We have decided that certain punishments are wrong, even if traditional religions taught them. This reflects well on human moral development, but does not, strictly speaking, disprove hell's existence. What we fear. Hell endures not primarily as doctrine, but as fear. Humans fear suffering. We fear death. We fear meaninglessness. We fear that evil goes unpunished. We fear that we are not good enough, that we have failed moral tests, that we deserve punishment. Hell gives form to these fears. It says, yes, you should fear. Suffering awaits. Your inadequacies matter eternally. Evil will be punished, including the evil you have committed. But hell also, paradoxically, offers comfort. It says evil does not triumph. Justice exists. Meaning is real. The universe cares about morality. These are comforting thoughts, even if the price is eternal punishment for some. The question each person must answer: does hell exist because humans fear and need it? Or do humans fear and need it because it exists? I cannot answer that. What I can say is this: if hell does not exist, humanity has inflicted incalculable suffering on itself through 5,000 years of hell belief, fear, anxiety, nightmares, trauma, violence committed to save souls or punish heretics. This would be among history's great tragedies. If hell does exist, and if most of humanity is going there as most hell doctrines teach, then this tragedy exceeds anything human history has produced. The suffering of all earthly wars, famines, plagues, and disasters combined would be insignificant compared to infinite conscious torment for billions. I will not tell you which to believe. I will say, whichever you choose, take it seriously. If you believe in hell, let that belief motivate compassion, not cruelty. If you reject hell, acknowledge the comfort and justice it provided to millions, even as you celebrate liberation from its fear. Hell shaped civilization. It inspired Dante, Milton, Michelangelo, Bosch. It motivated moral philosophy, legal systems, charitable works, and artistic masterpieces. It terrorized but also organized. It comforted and tormented. It reflected our worst fears and highest values simultaneously. Whether hell is real or not, humans made it real through belief. We created the concept, elaborated it, painted it, preached it, feared it, and used it to shape societies. Hell is our creation. Whether it is also God's creation remains the ultimate unanswerable question. As we emerge from this 6-hour journey, I hope you understand hell not as simple doctrine to accept or reject, but as complex human response to mortality, morality, and meaning. Hell is psychology, philosophy, art, history, and theology intertwined. It is what happens when humans ask, what happens when we die? Is justice real? Do our choices matter? Does evil receive consequences? These are the questions that built hell, and these are the questions that, regardless of literal hell's existence, we must each answer for ourselves as we navigate life's brief passage between two darknesses. Thank you for descending with me. We have returned, and whatever awaits us after this life, we have at least understood what 5,000 years of humanity believed was waiting. That knowledge in itself is valuable, not as salvation or damnation, but as understanding our species' long struggle with mortality, meaning, and the possibility that somehow, somewhere beyond death, we continue. The complete history of hell is the history of human hope and fear. Hope that life continues, fear of what that continuation might hold. That dual nature, hope and fear intertwined, is perhaps the most human thing of all.